The ISS Retribution was a floating junk heap, an ugly warship cobbled together from scavenged parts, yet it was humanity's last desperate hope against the Gorn. Admiral Stephen Warren grimaced as he surveyed the battle damage from the bridge. Scorched armor plating, ruptured hull breaches, over half his crew dead or wounded, and that plasma burn across his temple hurt like hell. But the stubborn old battle axe had given better than she got, the sole survivor against a dozen enemy ships. "Jump drive is offline, sir. We're not going anywhere," Commander Jenkins reported, her voice tight. The entire bridge crew looked to Warren with worry in their eyes. They were stranded deep behind enemy lines with Gorn reinforcements inbound. As if on cue, the proximity alarms blared. A menacing Gorn battle fleet dropped out of hyperspace, a dozen cruel-looking warships bristling with weapons. The Gorn flagship, a monstrous dreadnought, filled the view screen as it hailed them. "This is Warlord Vortis of the Gorn Empire," a reptilian alien sneered, baring razor-sharp teeth. "That pathetic scrap heap you call a warship is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Surrender now, and I promise your deaths will be quick." Warren spat blood onto the deck. "I'll never surrender to Gorn scum like you, Vortis. You murdered my family, killed billions of us. We'll fight to the last man." "I'll enjoy drinking from your skull, human," Vortis laughed cruelly, cutting the transmission. Warren turned to address his battered crew. "This looks bad, I know. We're outgunned and outnumbered. The Retribution is barely holding together. But if we're going down, let's make those Gorn bastards pay for every inch in blood. No surrender, no mercy. For Earth." The human crew roared in defiance, scrambling to battle stations. Wounded men and women manned their posts with grim determination, ignoring their injuries. They all had lost someone to the Gorn. This was personal. Warren flipped open a locket, gazing at an old photo of his dead wife and daughter, both killed by the Gorn. He whispered a silent prayer, snapped the locket shut, then strapped himself into his command chair. The Retribution looked like a stupid, primitive warship to the arrogant Gorn, but the aliens would soon learn that underestimating human ingenuity and resolve was a fatal mistake. The Retribution was full of nasty surprises, and humanity was determined to win this war or die trying. The Retribution shuddered and rocked as a barrage of plasma bolts and disruptor beams slammed into its shields. Sparks flew from overloaded consoles on the bridge as the crew held tight to their stations. The view screen was filled with a kaleidoscope of deadly colors as the Gorn ships unleashed their full fury upon them. Warren gripped his armrests tight as he shouted over the din of battle, "Divert all power to shields. Keep them up at all costs." The Retribution's shields flared and flickered, pushed to the brink of collapse but somehow held against the onslaught. The old ship groaned in protest, her hull buckling in spots but refused to yield. "Return fire, target their weapon systems," Warren ordered. The human ship's puny cannons spat back, hurling shells and laser blasts at the much larger Gorn vessels. Most of the shots bounced harmlessly off their heavy armor plating, but a lucky salvo found a gap in the defenses of Vortis's flagship, striking its bridge head-on. A cheer went up from the crew as a gout of flame erupted from the enemy ship's command center. But their elation was short-lived, as the dreadnought kept coming, Vortis's fury now stoked to a murderous rage. Deep in the bowels of the Retribution, Chief Engineer Sanchez wiped sweat and grime from his face, as he and his team fought to keep the ship in one piece. Plasma conduits had ruptured, spewing deadly energies. Gravity plating was on the fritz, causing tools and debris to float by. Automated fire suppression systems kicked in to douse electrical blazes. "Reroute power from all non-essential systems," Sanchez yelled to his engineers over the blaring alarms. "Weld that breach shut, and someone get that damn coolant leak under control." His team scrambled to follow his commands, desperate to keep their ship's failing systems operational through this fight. Meanwhile, Marine Sergeant Hawkins led damage control parties to the worst hit sections. They sealed off compartments exposed to vacuum, dragged wounded comrades to safety, and doggedly battled the spreading fires. On the bridge, Warren conferred with Commander Jenkins, trying to find some way to turn the battle's tide. The Gorn ships had them surrounded in a sphere formation, hammering the retribution from all sides. "There," Jenkins pointed to a tactical display. "Their flagship is hanging back behind their main line. If we can punch through—" Warren nodded grimly. "Concentrate fire on the nearest cruiser. We need to—" His words were cut off as a huge explosion rocked the ship. A plasma torpedo had speared through their weakened aft shields and detonated inside the Retribution's belly. Damage reports flooded in, declaring whole decks open to space, power failing, weapons knocked out. Crew casualties were appalling. Warren hauled himself up from the floor, blood seeping from a nasty gash on his head. Emergency lighting bathed the bridge in hellish red hues, flickering on and off. Smoke choked the air, along with the cries of the wounded. "Sensors are down," Jenkins reported, her face pale. "We're fighting blind." Warren staggered over to the weapons station, shoving aside the broken body of its former operator. He rapidly inputted commands, wincing as his wounds pained him. "Switching to point defense mode," he declared. "Maybe the smaller guns can get through their shields and—" The Retribution's defense turrets opened up, spewing out a hailstorm of rapid-fire kinetic rounds and laser pulses. The lighter shots took a toll where the heavier weapons had failed, gradually chewing through the Gorn defenses. One enemy destroyer lost attitude control and spun off, trailing debris. But it wasn't enough, not nearly enough. More of the Gorn ships closed in, blasting huge rents in the Retribution's hull. The dying ship wouldn't last much longer under this kind of punishment. "Hawkins," Warren calmed engineering. "I need your Marines suited up and ready to go. You're boarding Vortis's flagship." There was a moment of shocked silence on the other end. Then Hawkins replied, his voice steady despite the insanity of the order. "Aye, aye, sir. We'll get it done." Warren switched frequencies to Sanchez. "Chief, I need every scrap of power you can muster diverted to the forward batteries and shuttle bay doors. We're going to blow those bastards a new one." As the Retribution shook itself apart around them, Warren's battered crew jumped to follow his desperate plan. It was a suicide mission with the slimmest chance of success, but it was the only card they had left to play. In the shuttle bay, Hawkins and his squad piled into the heavily armed boarding shuttle. The armored wedge-shaped craft rocketed out of the Retribution, narrowly evading the firestorm outside. Hawkins gripped his pulse rifle tight as he stared out the viewport at the massive Gorn flagship looming ahead. "All right, boys and girls," he voxed over the squad channel. "Time to show these scaly bastards what it means to piss off the human race. Hoorah!" "Hoorah!" his Marines shouted back, psyching themselves up for the hell to come. The shuttle jinked and juked, barely staying ahead of the storm of flak and interceptor fire filling the space around it. Pulse-pounding terror warred with adrenaline and raw hate in each Marine's gut as they hurtled toward the enemy ship, toward Vortis itself. At the last second, the shuttle slammed into the flagship's hull at full speed, using its reinforced nose like a ram to smash open an entry point. Gorn alarms shrieked as the humans stormed out, wearing black vacuum combat armor and mag boots. Disruptor beams sizzled past them, barely missing. Hawkins got his first good look at the Gorn in person, as a group of the reptilian aliens charged to meet their boarders. The hulking creatures were as tall as a human in power armor, with beady eyes, vicious teeth, and natural armored scales. They moved with frightening speed and agility, hissing with bloodlust. "Light 'em up," Hawkins roared, opening up on full auto along with his squad. A storm of armor-piercing rounds and micro-rockets met the Gorn head-on, tearing into their ranks. But the giant lizards shrugged off hits that would have cut a human in half, returning fire with snub-nosed disruptor rifles. Humans and Gorn died as they closed to point-blank range, viscera splattering the already filthy deck plates. Hawkins ducked under a vicious claw swipe from a Gorn warrior, jabbing his rifle barrel into the alien's throat and holding down the trigger. He backpedaled, kicking the gurgling corpse away and scanning for more targets. There was no time to think, only to react with lethal instinct. His Marines battled with suicidal ferocity, giving as good as they got. Bones cracked and blood sprayed as the two sides tore into each other in a frantic melee. The savage close-quarters fighting spread like a cancer through the Gorn ship, leaving flaming wreckage and bodies in its wake. But the humans were hideously outnumbered and outmatched, forced to rely on superior tactics and sheer bloody-minded tenacity to stay alive. One by one, Hawkins' Marines fell, dragged down by sheer weight of numbers. Inhuman screams and deafening gunfire echoed through the ship as they made the Gorn pay in blood for every inch of ground. Hawkins found himself alone, standing knee-deep in shredded corpses, human and Gorn alike. His armor was rent and scorched, leaking blood from a dozen wounds, but still he pushed forward, toward the bridge, toward Vortis. He blasted and battered his way through the final defenders, running on stims and pure hate. Finally, he breached the armored hatch to the bridge, storming inside like the wrath of God incarnate. Vortis stood from its command throne, hissing a cruel laugh as it beheld the lone human. The warlord was a giant even by Gorn standards, a monster in midnight black armor, decorated with the bones of fallen foes. "Little ape," it sneered in guttural English, "did you really think you could—" Back on the Retribution, the situation was grim. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, fires raged unchecked, and the few crew members still alive clung to their stations as the ship shook itself apart around them. Warren gripped the arms of his command chair, his face grim as he watched his ship dying by inches. "Weapons are gone, sir," Jenkins reported, her voice shaking. "Shields are down, hull integrity is at 20% and falling fast." Warren stared at the view screen, watching the Gorn ships pouring fire into his crippled vessel. He knew they couldn't take much more of this. It was time for one last roll of the dice. "Helm, set a collision course for that dreadnought," he ordered, pointing at the massive Gorn flagship. "Ramming speed." There was a moment of stunned silence on the bridge. Then slowly the helmsman nodded and input the commands. The Retribution's engines, already pushed beyond their limits, whined in protest as they powered up one last time. "All hands brace for impact," Warren said over the ship-wide comm. The Retribution surged forward, heading straight for the Gorn dreadnought. The enemy ship, realizing the humans' intent, tried to maneuver out of the way, but it was far too sluggish. The Retribution slammed into its flank at full speed, the impact sending both ships careening out of control. Inside the Gorn ship, Hawkins and Vortis were locked in a brutal hand-to-hand struggle. Claws raked against armor, fists pounded into flesh, and blood splattered the deck. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently as the Retribution collided with its hull. Both combatants were thrown off balance, tumbling away from each other. Hawkins recovered first, charging forward and tackling Vortis to the ground. He rained punches down on the warlord's head, putting all his strength and fury behind each blow. But Vortis's thick hide and armored scales absorbed the hits, and the Gorn bucked and twisted, throwing Hawkins off. The Marine crashed into a bulkhead, the breath driven from his lungs. He looked up to see Vortis looming over him, a wicked-looking blade in its claws. The Gorn lunged, stabbing downward, and Hawkins barely managed to roll aside in time. The blade struck the bulkhead, sending up a shower of sparks. Hawkins cast about desperately for a weapon, his hands closing around a jagged shard of metal that had been torn loose in the collision. He brought it up just as Vortis charged again, bracing the improvised spear against his chest. The Gorn's momentum drove it onto the blade, the razor-sharp point punching through its armor and into its flesh. Vortis staggered back, black blood oozing from the wound. It looked down at the metal shard protruding from its chest, then back up at Hawkins, its eyes blazing with rage and hate. With a roar, it ripped the spear free and tossed it aside, then lunged at the human again. They crashed to the deck once more, Vortis's bulk pinning Hawkins down. The Marine could feel his strength fading, his wounds and exhaustion taking their toll. Vortis snapped at his face, strings of drool spattering Hawkins' helmet. Razor-sharp claws dug into his arms, trying to tear through his armor. Hawkins knew he only had one chance. With a burst of desperate strength, He threw his arms up and around Vortis's neck, locking his hands together in a death grip. He squeezed with every ounce of power he had left, feeling the Gorn's throat beneath his fingers. Vortis thrashed and bucked, trying to break free, but Hawkins held on with grim tenacity. He poured all his pain, all his rage, all his grief into his grip, feeling the alien's windpipe slowly collapsing. Vortis's struggles began to weaken, its claws scrabbling weakly at Hawkins' arms. With a final wrenching twist, Hawkins felt Vortis's neck snap beneath his hands. The Gorn warlord went limp, his eyes glazing over in death. Hawkins released his grip, and the massive reptilian body thudded to the deck. Exhausted and bleeding from a dozen wounds, Hawkins staggered to his feet, surveying the carnage around him. The once pristine Gorn bridge was a shambles, strewn with the bodies of Vortis's elite guard, shattered consoles, and debris. Sparks rained down from severed power conduits, and acrid smoke choked the air, stinging Hawkins' eyes. Ignoring the stabbing pain of his injuries, Hawkins limped over to the communications station. Its screen cracked but still functional. With blood-slicked fingers, he hastily typed out a message to the Retribution. "Vortis is dead. Repeat, the warlord is confirmed KIA, requesting immediate extraction over." As he hit send, Hawkins slumped against the console, his adrenaline fading and exhaustion taking hold. He could only hope the message got through, and that there was still a ship left to extract him. On the bridge of the Retribution, Warren gripped the arms of the command chair as his crippled ship shuddered and groaned. Structural integrity alarms blared, and damage reports flooded in, each more dire than the last. With a tortured scream of rending metal, the Retribution finally broke free of the Gorn dreadnought's wreckage. "Get us out of here, best speed!" Warren barked. The helmsman, her face streaked with sweat and blood, coaxed a burst of thrust from the damaged engines. Trailing debris and venting atmosphere from a dozen breaches, the Retribution limped away from the devastated battlefield, leaving the shattered remains of the Gorn fleet drifting behind it. "Stand down from battle stations," Warren ordered wearily, "and get me a full damage assessment." As the crew hurried to comply, Warren surveyed the bridge. Consoles flickered and sparked, the air hazy with smoke. The deck was slick with blood and littered with the bodies of the dead. Less than a third of his command crew remained, the survivors battered and shell-shocked. The damage reports made for grim reading. Over half the ship was open to space, the hull breached in countless places. Main power was offline, life support failing. Weapons, shields, and engines were all but destroyed. And the casualty figures. Warren felt a cold hand grip his heart. Over two-thirds of his crew were dead or critically wounded. They had made the Gorn pay a steep price for every life, but Warren knew the Retribution couldn't survive another battle. They needed to regroup, repair, and rearm. But even as the thought crossed his mind, the sensor officer called out, "New contact bearing 035, range 200,000 kilometers and closing fast." Warren felt a surge of dread. Another Gorn ship coming to finish them off? He braced himself for the killing blow. But as the contact drew closer, the sensor officer reported a new detail that made Warren's heart leap. "Sir, I'm picking up a UEG IFF signal. It's one of ours." A few tense minutes passed as the ship drew alongside the Retribution, matching course and speed. Then the comms officer reported an incoming hail. "USS Nightingale to ISS Retribution, come in. We're a rapid response repair and resupply vessel, dispatched from Epsilon Eridani. Heard you could use a hand. Permission to dock and render assistance. Over." Warren couldn't keep the relief out of his voice as he replied, "Nightingale, you're a sight for sore eyes. Permission granted, port docking bay." As the Nightingale moved in and extended its docking clamps, teams of engineers, medics, and damage control specialists streamed aboard the Retribution. Spare parts, fuel, and medical supplies were rushed to where they were needed, most as the crew of the Nightingale worked to stabilize the battered warship. Sickbay soon overflowed with the wounded and dying, forcing triage in the corridors. Repair crews worked feverishly to seal breaches and restore main power, the ship slowly coming back to life around them. Warren was just stepping off the bridge, intent on checking in with his crew when his comms officer called out. "Sir, Priority 1 message coming in from UEG Central Command. It's Admiral Jameson." Warren felt a flicker of foreboding. He had a sinking feeling their respite would be short-lived. He stepped over to the comms station, activating the view screen. Admiral Jameson's lined face filled the screen, his expression grave. "Captain Warren, damn fine work out there, son. You and your crew did the impossible. Smashing an entire Gorn battle group with a single ship. I'm putting you in for the Star of Terror, highest commendation I can give." Warren nodded wearily. "Thank you, sir, but my crew did the real work and paid the price." Jameson's face softened. "I know, son, and there will be time to mourn the dead to honor their sacrifice, but right now, I need you and your ship back on the front lines." The Admiral paused, his expression turning grim. "The attack on the Retribution wasn't an isolated incident. The Gorn have launched a massive offensive, striking deep into UEG space. We have reports of attacks on a dozen worlds, with more coming in every hour. This is no border skirmish, Captain. This is all-out war." Warren felt a cold knot form in his gut, an invasion on a scale not seen in centuries. Jameson continued. "Epsilon Eridani is already reinforcing you with additional personnel and supplies. Get your ship patched up and your crew back in fighting shape, because as soon as you can give me all ahead full, I need you at these coordinates." A star map appeared on the view screen, an angry red icon blinking on the border between human and Gorn space. "The Gorn have hit Arcadia Colony. Hard. Wiped out the orbital defenses and landed a massive ground force. The local garrison is putting up a hell of a fight, but they're outnumbered and outgunned. They need reinforcements yesterday. You're the closest ship, Captain. And after what you just pulled off, those Gorn bastards will shit themselves when they see the Retribution bearing down on them." Warren saluted sharply. "Understood, Admiral. We won't let them down." As the view screen went dark, Warren turned to his crew. "You heard the man. We're needed back on the front lines. The Gorn want a war. We'll give them one. We'll make those scaled bastards pay for every drop of human blood they spill, for every inch of our territory they try to take." He punched up a shipwide comm. "All hands, this is the captain. Stow your grief, bury your dead, and patch up your wounds. We've got a colony to save and Xeno scum to exterminate. You've proved you're the finest crew in the fleet. Now let's remind the Gorn why you never ever fuck with the human race." As the Retribution floated in space, swarmed by repair crews and resupply shuttles, Warren stood on the bridge, overseeing the efforts to bring his battered ship back to fighting shape. He felt a bone-deep weariness, the weight of the losses they'd suffered pressing down on him. But there was no time to rest, no time to mourn. The war still raged, and the Retribution was needed back on the front lines. Suddenly the comm station crackled to life, the voice on the other end laced with static and barely controlled emotion. "Captain Warren, priority message from Earth. It's bad, sir." Warren felt a cold dread settle in his gut as he strode over to the station. "Put it through." The face that appeared on the view screen was haggard and haunted, the uniform of a UEG admiral torn and scorched. "Captain Warren, I have grave news. Earth has fallen." Warren gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles turning white. "What do you mean, fallen?" "The Gorn launched a massive surprise attack. They overwhelmed our defenses, landed invasion forces on every continent. It's a slaughter down there, Warren. They're killing everything in their path." The bridge crew fell silent, the weight of the news hitting them like a physical blow. Earth, their home, the cradle of humanity, in the hands of the Gorn. "What about the fleet? Where's Admiral Jameson?" Warren asked, dreading the answer. The admiral on the screen shook his head. "Jameson is dead. His ship was destroyed in the initial assault. The fleet, what's left of it, is scattered and leaderless. You're the highest-ranking officer we have left, Warren." Warren closed his eyes for a moment, the enormity of the situation washing over him. When he opened them again, they blazed with a cold, deadly rage. "Understood, Admiral. The Retribution is at your disposal. We'll make the Gorn pay for every human life they've taken." The repairs on the Retribution were completed in record time, the crew working with a frenzied determination. They knew what was at stake now. This was no longer just a war for territory or resources. This was a fight for the very survival of their species. As the Retribution set course for Earth, it was joined by a ragtag fleet of human survivors, battered warships, civilian transports, anything that could fly and fight. They were a motley bunch, but they were united in their resolve to take back their home. But as they approached Earth, they were confronted by a sight that made even the most battle-hardened among them quail. A massive Gorn blockade encircled the planet, hundreds of warships bristling with weapons. The Retribution's sensors picked up the chatter of Gorn comms, their reptilian voices hissing with cruel laughter as they watched the human fleet approach. Warren stood on the bridge, his face grim as he surveyed the enemy formation. He knew they couldn't win a straight fight against those odds, but maybe, just maybe, they could still make a difference. He turned to his crew, his voice steady despite the fear and anger churning inside him. "We can't beat them head-on, but we can give our people on the ground a fighting chance. Here's the plan." So the Retribution surged forward, its engines flaring bright as it charged towards the Gorn blockade. The enemy ships turned to face it, their weapons locking on, but Warren had no intention of engaging them directly. Instead, the Retribution began to weave and dodge, its movements erratic and unpredictable. It wove between the massive Gorn dreadnoughts, drawing their fire away from the rest of the human fleet. Plasma bolts and disruptor beams slammed into its shields, making the whole ship shudder and groan. Consoles exploded on the bridge, showering the crew with sparks. But still the Retribution pressed on, its crew pouring every ounce of skill and determination into keeping their ship intact. They fired back when they could, targeting weapon systems and engines, trying to create as much chaos and confusion in the Gorn ranks as possible. And it was working. As the Retribution drew the bulk of the Gorn fire, the rest of the human fleet managed to slip past the blockade, their troop transports diving towards the planet's surface. Dropships and landing craft spilled from their holds, streaking through the atmosphere towards the embattled cities below. On the ground, the human resistance forces were locked in desperate street-to-street combat with the Gorn occupiers. They fought with everything they had, scavenged weapons, improvised explosives, even their bare hands when necessary. They knew they were outgunned and outmatched, but they refused to give in. And then, like a miracle from above, the reinforcements from the fleet arrived. Marines and soldiers poured out of the dropships, their weapons blazing as they joined the fray. Tanks and armored vehicles rumbled through the rubble-strewn streets, their cannons roaring. The tide began to turn. The Gorn, who had been pressing their advantage, now found themselves on the defensive. They fell back, their lines crumbling under the renewed human assault. In the skies above, the Retribution was finally beginning to falter. Its shields were gone, its armor pitted and scarred. Whole sections of the ship were open to vacuum, the bodies of the dead floating in the void. But still, incredibly, it fought on. Warren knew they couldn't hold out much longer. The Gorn ships were closing in, their weapons tearing into the Retribution's unprotected hull. Explosions ripped through the ship, the screams of the dying echoing through the corridors. He gave the order, his voice heavy with finality. "All hands abandon ship, get to the escape pods now." As his crew scrambled to obey, Warren stayed on the bridge, his hands flying over the helm controls. He plotted a new course, straight for the heart of the Gorn fleet, straight for the massive dreadnought that had been coordinating the blockade. The Retribution, the stupidest warship the Gorn had ever seen, surged forward one last time. Disruptor beams and plasma bolts slammed into it, tearing great gouts of flame and debris from its hull. But it didn't falter, didn't deviate from its course. Warren watched on the view screen as the dreadnought loomed larger and larger. He could see the Gorn on its bridge, their reptilian faces twisted in surprise and fear as they realized what was happening. The collision was titanic. The Retribution, already a flaming wreck, slammed into the dreadnought at full speed. Its reactor, pushed far past the breaking point, finally detonated in a blinding flash of light. The explosion engulfed both ships, consuming them utterly. A new sun bloomed briefly in the skies above Earth, a funeral pyre for the Retribution and its valiant crew. On the planet's surface, the humans saw the bright flare in the sky. They knew without being told what it meant. The Retribution, the ship that had saved them all, was gone. But its sacrifice was not in vain. Inspired by Warren and his crew's selfless bravery, the humans fought with renewed vigor. They pushed the Gorn back, street by street, building by building. The fighting was brutal and bloody, the casualties staggering, but inch by hard-fought inch they retook their cities. It was a long, grueling campaign, months of constant battle, of desperate last stands and Pyrrhic victories. But finally, after a final climactic battle at the ruins of the UEG capital, the last Gorn stronghold fell. Earth was free. In the aftermath, as the survivors emerged from their bunkers and shelters to survey the ruined landscape of their world, they wept. For the fallen, for the destruction, for the sheer magnitude of what they had endured. But even amidst the grief and the pain there was a spark of hope. They had won. Against all odds, against an enemy that had seemed invincible, they had prevailed. And as they began the slow, painful process of rebuilding, they knew that they owed their victory, their very survival, to the courage and sacrifice of the Retribution and her crew. The stupidest warship the Gorn had ever seen had proven to be the one thing they couldn't overcome, the indomitable will and spirit of humanity. But even as the humans savored their hard-fought triumph, they knew that this was only the beginning. Out in the stars, the Gorn Empire still lurked, licking its wounds and plotting its revenge. The war for survival, for the very future of the human race, was far from over. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.